Hello and welcome to Talking Events, the industry podcast brought to you by Event Industry News. Today, being recorded from the HQ of Blackout in South London, suppliers of drapes and rigging to the international live events industry. A big thank you to the team and the staff at Blackout HQ for allowing us to set up the podcast studio and record these episodes. On with today's subject matter, let's welcome our guests to the studio, first of all. Paul Riddiford, NRC Manager from Plasa. Paul, welcome to Talking Events.
Thank you very much.
Robin Elias, Technical Director of Unusual Rigging. Robin, welcome along to the studio.
Thank you.
And Eric Porter. Eric, a semi-retired rigger, but very active in delivering training, primarily at the Backstage Academy, if I'm right in saying, Eric, and also on a freelance basis, and very active within the rigging industry. Eric, welcome to the studio.
Thank you.
All three of our guests today sit on the National Rigging Advisory Group. I don't know whether it would be a board or a committee. I'm sure we'll find that as we move on in today's episode. But what we're going to be talking about is the National Rigging Advisory Group, the Riggers Conference, Plasa. Let's look first of all at what Plasa is. I know Plasa and I'm familiar with it, but for the listeners tuning into the podcast today, tell us first of all about Plasa and what it is.
So Plasa is the Professional Lighting and Sound Association. We are a trade association representing the lighting and sound industries. We've been around for over 30 years and we basically react to any questions which come from industry. We represent industry. We offer membership to lighting sound companies, and as such, as members, we offer additional services such as legal advice, access to standards, etc., etc. So we've been around for over 30 years, and we represent the industry.
And as a body that represents, as you surmised, sound and lighting, rigging is something that is very prevalent in both of those particular fields of expertise. So we'll have a huge crossover. So how much of Plasa is involved in working with the rigging industry and the rigging professionals that are in the sector?
Well, very much so. And in fact, this is why we're going on to talk about the NRAG today. The NRAG initially was set up as an initiative by Plasa as a means of getting industry professionals together to act as an advisory group to Plasa, but also to represent all of the rigging companies in the UK. And
Robin, Elias, welcome to Talking Events for the first time. As a company working in that rigging industry, what does working with an association like Plasa and moving that on to being part of NRAG, what does that mean to you as a company, and what does that allow you to do?
Well, it's very valuable, and particularly in the formation of the live event rigging accreditation scheme, the National Rigging Certificate. The original NRAG was put together to advise Plasa on the technical issues involved and the technical content of the accreditation scheme, and in September 2007 the National Rigging Certificate was implemented. This enables riggers to carry a card proving their competence within the industry, which has its all sorts of advantages which you can imagine.
Absolutely. And I think a useful moment then to turn to Eric, and as somebody who's worked as a rigger, how long have you been in the industry?
Oh, a very long time. I think my first job as a senior rigger was in 1980. When I actually went out responsible for stuff not landing on people's heads.
And the reason that I asked that is, like many jobs and roles within the events industry and within the live events industry, if you go back 30, 40 years, the jobs now, whilst on paper that you're fundamentally doing the same thing, the skills and the qualifications and the training and a lot of the background paperwork and checks that has to be done to do those jobs has changed significantly, hasn't it?
Hugely.
And how have you seen the professional development of your peers change in the time that you've been in the industry, and how have things like the National Rigging Certificate impacted the guys that you're working with?
In so many ways to answer that. The NRAG had to be set up to advise Plasa on the writing of standards. We were following an NVQ kind of architecture for the qualification scheme, And so that depends upon national standards existing. The NRAG preceded the NRC, which Robin correctly says was actually launched at the Plasa show of 2007. The impact how it was received by the existing rigging fraternity varied from violent rejection and objection to it to thank heaven that we've got something from the industry to serve the industry. I think most of us believe it would have been rather inappropriate for general construction industry qualification schemes just to have been hammered in.
And we've seen that example in
around
the
us.
event industry before, haven't we, where construction-based principles have tried to be implemented and they don't quite work because the logistics and the fundamentals differ greatly.
I was going to say it was at a time where within the construction industry there was the CSCS card scheme, which was a scheme of competence for people working within the construction industry, and it was seen that it would only be a matter of time before something like that would be implemented onto our industry, and the decision was taken that rather than wait for people outside of the industry to come and impose a qualification which would likely not be fit for purpose, that it would be a good idea that we arranged our own, which is why the NRAG was set up with a view to creating a qualification of competence within the rigging industry, which was absolutely fit for purpose and which we could have, or the industry could have, means of steering and developing.
When NRAG was formed, was there a worry or concern at any level that as the industry was growing, there was going the spectrum between good rigging and bad rigging was going to just become broader and broader and broader, and that was one of the reasons that drove forming something like NRAG to make sure that things were kept on a more straightforward pathway?
Yeah, that's partly true. The difference between the construction industry and the event rigging industry is that the construction industry has been going on in some form or another forever, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Rigging within the events industry and the entertainment business was born and grew relatively in the relatively recent past. Consequently, we found it was getting bigger, the demands were greater, the weights that people were hanging up got bigger and bigger, and there was very little training around. People had to learn as they went on. But it soon became apparent that like other trades within the industry, scaffolding, electrician, etc., why didn't a rigger have a card proving his competence? There was a huge gap there, and it seemed inevitable that it would be imposed on us by the rigorous health and safety regimes, so we invented it ourselves. It's very well established now and widely accepted.
How easy was it to get it adopted within the industry, i.e. the venues, the promoters, the actual event organisers and clients that you're subsequently working for and with?
Well, there's always a little bit of resistance to anything new, but I think that venues, promoters and everyone concerned saw the value in it, and there's really no argument to ignore it. Who would want an unqualified person working in a high-risk industry for them or in their venue when they could have one with proof of competence?
Eric, going back to, you mentioned that there is inevitably certain elements within the industry, certain people that just said, no, well, why do we need this? You know, we're experienced, we're competent, we've been doing this years, no doubt. Why do we now need to go and get this? Have those people come round to the right way of thinking, or has it slowly become something that people have generally thought, yeah, this is a good thing?
Large numbers of the people who most fiercely resisted the implementation of the scheme have now actually become our best ambassadors within the industry. Word of mouth is the most powerful influence within a small sector industry. You know, people gossip a great deal. There are still one or two very well established folk who believe that they don't need the scheme, and indeed they don't, you know, because they're out there earning an absolute fortune working on the most expensive tours. And but on the other hand, there are others like that who, for whatever reason, decided to come on board and realised, I think folk who've been out there for a long time and have learnt well on the job often don't realise what they don't know technically.
Yeah.
And the younger intake, if you like, who know an awful lot of theory, don't realise how ham-fisted and sometimes illogical they are in their work practices. So I think the value of the National Rigging Certificate has been to at least put a middle ground. You know, there are opposing types of
finding that
entrant,
happy medium between the theoretical application of these jobs and the practical application of these jobs, and combining the experience and the knowledge together. And
doing it safely and efficiently, and being able to problem solve because you have understanding.
Those who resisted at first were those who had been doing rigging for what they considered to be a long time, and they considered themselves experts, so why the hell should they be assessed by other people?
But surely with the change and such rapid development in sound, light, you know, the actual technical hardware that's being used now at live events changes so rapidly year on year, like all technology does now, laptops, mobile phones. There must be an ongoing process now of re-evaluation and looking at the hardware that's being deployed and how then it needs to be rigged.
Well, that's sort of true, but on the other hand, if you're hanging a large weight up above people, doesn't matter whether it's an aircraft, a satellite, a rock and roll rig, a PA cluster, the principles and the rigging equipment are pretty similar.
I'm curious to throw into the mix here. The National Arenas Association has guidance for rigging within NAA venues. When another association like those guys puts together a guidance for rigging, how much of it is done in conjunction with you guys and in conjunction with the wider industry to make sure that everybody's singing from the same hymn sheet?
It is an important consideration. But even it's accepted that qualified riggers are going to be working in a lot of different environments, and one of the rules to follow is that you follow the house rules.
Right.
So it meshes quite nicely.
Okay.
Yeah. Also, in more recent years, the last 4 years or so, the NRAG was expanded by Plasa to include many more influences. I mean, all of whom hang things in the air: television, theatre, exhibition, you name it. And there is now a seat on the NRAG that is covered by one of the senior folk of the National Arenas Association. So there's a dialogue within the NRAG, and in answer to your question, actually an awful lot of bringing together of ideas, practice.
So there is very much this the defragmentation of the wider industries and people now working together a lot more via Plasa and via NRAG to actually discuss these issues. When we're looking at something like the NRC, what are the criteria for somebody who actually to get onto it? Do they have to have already had experience? Could you have somebody who's never done this before step forward and say, look, I'd like to qualify and get my NRC and then work as a rigger in the industry? What's the actual process of somebody gaining this?
The NRC is an assessment scheme, so those with a chance of being assessed and accredited need to present evidence for their assessments. They need to do practical on-site jobs and be observed, and they need to produce written evidence which amounts to their experience being endorsed by other people in the industry. They need to sit a written exam, and they need to answer all questions over the 2-day assessment. One problem that transpired after it was put in place was that, as you point out, what route into the industry is there for complete beginners who are not ready for the NRC yet? And to that end, Plasa launched the Trainee rigger scheme in January of 2015,
right,
which gives beginners a framework and a path to follow, and a logbook to fill in, and advice on what they need to do to reach the standard where they can be assessed for the National Rigging Certificate Level 2.
Because like any industry and any sort of qualification, you don't want a chicken and egg scenario where you know, in order to work in the industry, you have to have that qualification, but in order to get the qualification, you've got to first work in the industry.
Yeah, it's the NRC is an assessment of competence. Now, competence is an easy throwaway word these days, really, but competence is only gained through training and experience. Now, within our industry, a lot of people come into rigging through helping a mate unload boxes on a Saturday morning, etc. So training historically comes through hours spent on arena floors. Having said that, there are also established training rigging courses. So training and experience are important. Where you get the training is individual, it's down to you. The experience, obviously, working within the industry for a number of years. The NRC doesn't stipulate how many. There is a national recognised standard required in order to achieve a level 2. That is explained to people before they take the assessment. So it's for them to judge whether they believe they're at that particular level in order to take the assessment. There's no pass or fail. So very much as Eric said, like the MBQ route, if you fail to reach the required standard on the day, you're advised as to where you failed to reach that standard, and then you go away and you upskill, and then you can come back and retake. So, you know, albeit that it's an assessment of competence, how they gain that competence is down to the individual.
Right.
As Robin mentioned earlier on with the trainee rigger, for a long time, as I say, people come in helping friends out. There was no established route into the rigging industry. So in 2015, we launched a scheme which advises people who are absolutely fresh to the industry how best to get that level of training and to get that level of experience. We offer advice as to the activities that you should be carrying out and the equipment that you will need in order to get to NRC Level 2 standard.
Eric, I'm curious, you mentioned that you deliver a lot of training now in the industry and up at the Backstage Academy, which some of our listeners may or may not be familiar with, but the Backstage Academy has been around for a few years now, but it's quickly becoming quite a well-respected entity within the industry, isn't it, for what it's delivering from a training point of view to people wanting to take that step into the industry. Is it helping to strike the balance that we mentioned between practical application and theoretical knowledge?
Yes, I think so. In fact, its big success story has been that it's not been churning out people with degrees in our industry-related subjects, but who have no real practical. An awful lot of universities are turning out graduates who really need to be beginners the moment they start actually working at the coalface in our industry. And that's been a complaint for years and years and years. And over the period of time, the Backstage Academy has established itself as the kind of place that actually turns out people that you can employ on day one.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the practical part of it is what sets it apart from an awful lot of others.
And moving that on a step, I know that there's. Well, I'm curious to ask all three of you about the Riggers Conference. What it is, is this the first one that's taking place?
No.
Crikey, no.
Fourth, isn't it?
I would say fifth, sixth,
fourth or
maybe,
fifth, or
maybe.
Fourth, fifth, sixth.
So every year, Plasa hold an international show in London.
Yep.
And around about 6 years ago, I'm going to guess, we set up the Plasa Rigging Conference to sit alongside. It's originally, I think it was a 2-day conference. Now it's down to 1 day. But it's a specific conference for the rigging industry, and we spend the entire day talking about issues of the day. We get as many people together as we can.
Worldwide.
It's absolutely international. It's an opportunity for the entire rigging community to come together and to socialise and network, but also to talk about sort of issues that are around at that time. So,
because I guess the very nature of what you do, you can't really call it a UK industry, can you? Because
absolutely.
you're out on tour, so riggers it's an international community.
Well, it
isn't
is, but like many others, it's led by the UK, of course.
Absolutely. No, and you're quite right to say that, because I've said many times on the podcast before that our events industry within the UK, regardless of which particular sector you look at or which vertical strand of it, often we do lead the way in many, many things. NRAG and the certificates then prompted other countries to follow suit? Have we led the way in that particular example?
Go ahead,
Go on.
Paul.
I was just going to say there are other countries, certainly within Europe, that offer competence-based qualifications for riggers. But what I'm finding interesting from the NRC point of view is that I get a lot of international inquiry from countries that don't currently have anything along those lines and want to get NRC qualified.
Both
Right.
Europe, the Middle East, all over.
Certainly,
Far
I
East.
see.
yeah. I mean, Qatar, places like that, Singapore. We've trained people from an awful lot from
Scandinavia.
Portugal, from Scandinavia, and they look upon what we've developed as the NRC as being the best required standard, and actually coming over specifically to take that.
So we should qualify that the NRC is not a UK assessment or qualification. This is an international qualification or certification.
I mean, we mentioned early doors that it's based on occupational standards, national occupational. Now, those are UK standards.
Right.
So you could argue that anybody that gains their NRC is to a UK standard. Having said that, it's also based on best practice. It's based on industry input, and it obviously works across boundaries, across countries. But it is fundamentally a UK
So it
qualification.
carries a lot of weight worldwide, but it's based on UK legislation,
Mm.
guidance and standards.
And like many things, we should be proud of the fact that it's developed in the UK, because the fact that we can promote it and that we have international interest as a result of it being based on UK standards is something that we should shout about.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there are big structural differences, even between ourselves and our European neighbours, about what competence qualifications consist of and how they are put together. From basically because the varying countries have got different historical, educational standards, processes, as well as industrial standards that you might. A lot of what we do, for example, in rigging is lifting things up in the air and bringing them down again. Well, there have been standards around for crane operators and people slinging loads under cranes. So the tasks of writing standards for the NRC was very much one of taking existing standards as much as possible and rewriting them and putting them forward to the relevant body for acceptance.
So that might vary from country to country, of course.
Yes,
little
of course.
little variations from country to country are going to make a difference. Certainly Plasa has given a lot of effort to helping other groups of people, particularly within Europe, but beyond as well, in setting up something equivalent. But it's a costly and time-consuming business. I mean, the setting up of National Rigging Certificate occupied a huge investment from Plasa, and
To do that elsewhere is a significant commitment, isn't it, for any other organisation to step forward and try and do that?
An awful lot of commitment of investment from the local industries, the interested parties in their.
And all the input from the NRAG was people from all different competitors within the industry came and sat around a table and put their differences aside and contributed for nothing to putting this scheme together. And the same goes for all the people who became assessors, and the same goes for the companies who have put together assessment centres and run and administer the assessment centres. It's not profitable. It's for the good of the industry and the safety within the industry.
And presumably, putting those differences aside and getting all the companies to sit around a table, ultimately, am I right in saying that a lot of the staff, the actual riggers themselves, are working on a freelance basis, and there will be crossover between all those different companies, so it's in everybody's best interest to have freelance riggers who are working to a better standard, full stop?
Correct.
But in other territories, very often there are two main companies.
Yeah.
And where the rigging world in the UK has been fairly large with a lot of different operators. Other territories, there's maybe two main companies who are such fierce competitors that it's a real struggle to get them to sit down and put a neutral hat on in a bit of neutral territory.
Which goes back to the point you were making about how difficult it would be to to start setting up equivalents in other territories. Paul, I'm curious to just ask a quick question here relating to the Plasa website and the Plasa skills section. I'm looking at the trainee rigger scheme registered trainees. There's actually a list and a registry on there. I was wondering if you could tell the listeners a little bit about that register scheme and how it sort of dovetails in with what we've been discussing.
Sure, of course. So we've already mentioned the trainee rigger scheme started at the beginning of last year. And part of their registration is that we publicly advertise the fact that they're registered for the scheme, and we put on their contact details. And this allows any employers or any freelance riggers that are looking for help or an opportunity to give one of the trainees experience to get in touch with them and to use them on jobs, whatever that may be, and to give them the experience needed. Each time they carry out a task which is relevant to their progression towards competence, they log it down in a book which is signed off by an NRC qualified rigger. And fundamentally, when they come then to do their NRC, they bring that with them as another form of evidence. So it sort of gives the assessor who's looking at what they've done and their level of competence, gives them a chance to see what experience they've had, where they've done it, etc., etc. So yeah, so the trainee rigger, the fact that we advertise it means that they get experience where necessary.
Which goes back to the point, and the reason I wanted to throw that in is it goes back to the point we're making about gaining and giving that experience to people who are wanting
a route into the
industry. And presumably, Robin, you've used that registry and have been part of creating it, but also you assess this. You assess the actual NRC as well. Do you work as an assessor?
I'm an assessor, and Unusual Rigging runs one of the 2 assessment centres,
right,
which I'm in charge of. And in addition to that, the company has put a couple of our apprentices on the TRC scheme, and indeed all our riggers are NRC qualified, and we don't employ freelancers who aren't either. So as with a lot of companies, we fully support and endorse the NRC and TRC, and we recognise its value.
When you work through the assessment criteria, how regularly is the criteria refined or updated or altered in any way? Is there a set point each year where you will sit and look at any revisions that need to be making, or is it something that can be done on a fairly ongoing basis?
Well, they're few and far between, and reviews like that would only take place if guidance was changed so that what up until that date had been regarded as best practice was then superseded. So it's very rare that happens. I think Paul's probably better qualified to answer that.
It's just probably now's a good time to sort of talk about the standardisation meetings that we have. The NRAG that we've been talking about so far meets quarterly, and what we do off the back of that meeting is to piggyback what we call the standardisation meeting. Now, standardisation meetings take place at assessment centres after each cohort. So the assessors will get together with the centre managers and staff and discuss how that day has gone. But every quarter, we also hold a general standardisation by which all of the assessment centres and staff involved come together, and we talk about issues of the day, whether or not how the scheme is going, whether or not there's anything that we need to review. So every 3 months we bring up issues around the table, and so we can mould the qualification as and when necessary, basically. We don't change fundamentally the standards, but we can change the delivery or assessment techniques potentially, or something along those lines. So we're constantly reviewing the assessment process and the certification scheme as we go through the year.
Yeah, there have been constant little tweaks to it based on feedback from the candidates themselves, you know, pointing out what they may correctly or incorrectly figure is an inconsistency. But we note those and bring them together in a forum.
Yeah, we get feedback from every single assessment that takes place from the candidate, and that again is reported to the group, and we decide off the back of that whether there's any tweaks we need to make.
Do you find that people taking this qualification or being assessed, to get their NRC, are working exclusively as a rigger, or is there now a crossover as people become multi-skilled in the industry, where you'll have lighting technicians and audio technicians who are also who have also got some experience in rigging and have decided, look, it's in my best interest to get my NRC as well because it just gives another string to my bow? Or do you find it's quite a specialist area?
We could answer that, but we're going to wait for the next podcast.
Well, I should point out that we're recording a number of episodes at Blackout HQ today, and we're going to be talking to the guys and having them on other episodes about various different elements that, as Robin points out, relate
Absolutely.
to the topic. So I think actually, looking at the time then, that might be a pertinent point then to wrap up what we're speaking about today. But I think what we should also do, Paul, is point out how people may get involved in the Riggers Conference, forthcoming Plasa events, and let's talk about that briefly, how people may actually get involved in this if they haven't done already.
So the Plasa show, I believe, is on the 18th of September, or kicks off on the 18th of September this year.
Mm-hmm.
The conference will be on the Monday.
Yeah.
Previous to that, there is a riggers forum on the Sunday afternoon at the show, by which we invite all riggers to come together as a bit of networking, but also to discuss any issues that may arise.
When you say riggers forum on a Sunday afternoon,
yes,
this sounds like a very loose
it's
term for
basically
meeting down the pub.
It's we try and keep it as informal as possible. It's an absolutely open forum where we invite anybody to come along, and we literally sit in a room and we talk about whatever it is that riggers are concerned with.
Okay.
And we talk openly, and there is no judgment on the day, so we have a good chat, and we talk things to death sometimes. And then, of course, there's the networking that follows that.
Sure.
So that's on the Sunday afternoon, and then the Riggers Conference runs all day on the Monday.
And presumably that perhaps semi-informal networking on the Sunday gives a nice precursor to the formal conference, and maybe even raises some last-minute points and things that can be discussed there.
Absolutely. This year at the conference, there's a number of speakers. I think one of the issues we're talking about certainly is people flying, which is a big concern for people at the moment, so we're going to discuss that. So you're absolutely right. The Sunday is the informal side, and the conference the following day is the structure.
The term people flying alone, I think, is, for people who are just listening to it, straight away in my head, people flying is a wonderful term to imagine what it could actually deliver in the industry.
Welcome along to the conference. Absolutely.
The Plasa website is where you can find all the information. I think it's plasa.org. So anybody listening, head along to plasa.org to find out more about the conference. Presumably there's links and things on there for people to register for it and come along to it. We're going to wrap up this particular episode. Say thank you to our guests. First of all, Paul Riddiford, NRC Manager for Plasa. Paul, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Robin Elias, Technical Director of Unusual Rigging. Robin, thanks for your input on today's episode. Eric Porter, we'll refrain from the full thing, but Eric Porter, veteran of the rigging industry.
Thanks, James.
Thanks for joining us today. You've been listening to Talking Events. Download the podcast from iTunes. Watch videos of the podcast on eventindustrynews.co.uk, and we'll see you on the next episode of Talking Events.